Rick and Morty versus Cthulhu. We see an alien wondering if Rick and Morty brought the goods, as I wonder if the outfits and shades really means they're from different dimensions or just trying to look cool for a movie reference. Rick reassures Globier that he always delivers, and tosses a device with a button. We see green light spew out in front of one of the aliens, who says it looks sweet as he has some green liquid from what looks like a cauldron in his hands. He sucks it up and says that isn't sugar. Rick puts up a bunch of floating little force fields and asks them if their taste blobs melted from decades of overstimulation, which implies that he did give them sugar. He shoots at them, and I wonder why Morty tells them to put their hands up too late. Morty reveals that he can't find any sugar, only aspartame, as I wonder why they're back in their regular clothes and why they ever changed outfits. It really wouldn't kill the series to have them be in different outfits all the time like real people. They looked cool. Rick calls out Morty on taking it upon himself to make that stupid decision. He should have told Rick he couldn't find any sugar. Rick says now he'll have to do a high fructose corn scan of the house to make sure they haven't already been compromised by those aliens, who really shouldn't have gone to do that because they didn't know they were gonna get disappointed, and they got killed anyways. Morty asks to help, and Rick uses a scanner and questions Jerry because he knows he doesn't read books. He finds out Jerry was reading a Cthulhu book and doesn't like the sound of that. He gets told Beth's eating shrimp and says it's already begun, and a completely different infestation has already taken over the house. Beth looks cool by being so annoyed and nonchalant. Rick says the air is polluted with mythos molecules, as in magic. He should just say that instead of being convoluted. I hope it's explained why. Obviously, if someone just having a regular Cthulhu book caused this, it'd be happening everywhere and the books would have already been recalled, and Jerry would have never bought one. So maybe he got this book from another universe thanks to Rick, which has to be the case. But Rick's refusing to explain that and instead says some extremely boring dialogue. I'm just wondering why Cthulhu would target them. It has to be because of the aspartame thing, or the intro would be a complete waste of writing. But it's so annoying to not confirm that right away. Rick says they've gotta slay Cthulhu in the Lovecraft dimension, without explaining which one of the infinite ones there'd be, and how he knows which one he has to go to. And I have to assume the reason he won't simply open and close a portal over his head is that he loves fighting. And maybe he secretly got the data of all of his family backed up so that he can handle endangering them by getting them involved in fighting that's totally unnecessary. Although I guess he's taking them with him because he thinks it's safer for them to be with him than to stay in a house that's infested. Not to mention, even if Cthulhu can regenerate from a portal closing on him, Rick could drop a bomb through it too. Some of Rick's family gets dressed up in a new way just for the occasion, and it's good to see Jerry's plan to be useful with the crossbow. But I wonder if it's really as easy to aim as he thinks, since Tails sucked at it at first and thought he'd never get as good as aiming. Rick says Morty's laser privileges are revoked, which is dumb though because Morty didn't do anything wrong involving lasers, and they might need him to use them. Rick also takes the risk of putting his arm in the portal instead of walking into it. He says they're gonna go to the scariest place ever, and he means Massachusetts somehow, despite everything he's experienced. I guess he was being sarcastic. He says this area doesn't show up on maps back home because it's a fictional region called Arkham. If it was fictional, they couldn't go there, so he shouldn't have said fictional. He would have just said he took them to another universe. Based on his readings, he thinks they're close to his first target. He says that before they tackle Cthulhu, they need to weaken this world of Lovecraft a bit to show them they mean business. But why? Cthulhu won't get the chance to have backup if he just closes a portal on his head or fires a laser through the portal behind him. I guess he really wants a fun fight with him, and so he needs to eliminate his backup to have a chance of winning. Maybe he wants that real fight because of a desire to get back at him for infesting the house's food. Rick gets threatened by someone with a gun, and the guy's father wonders who Rick is. And Rick already knows his name and the date because he read the books, and this is the Lovecraft dimension, which is real by sheer coincidence. Rick calls them fictional, and somehow isn't called crazy. Instead, he agrees to take him to his well, and Rick tells him he's gonna save his life. The well's glowing, and Rick says that alien meteorite the guy found last summer squirted in his water. Rick explains how dangerous the pink lightning stuff is, not that it matters now, and smiles in admiration for it before using it to bites, saying, "We could call it ineffective, useless," as he sucks it up and puts it in a bucket. It should say trapped in that bucket, but instead the bucket's got no lid on it. The guy says Rick powderized it, and Rick says that bucket is Cthulhu dust. Rick portals to a universe with a family as Jerry's upset for no reason. Rick has a bunch of boring dialogue, and then goes to a library and cheerfully greets an alien called Wilbur and says he heard a rumor that he's looking for a magic book. He then says a one-liner and tries to shoot lasers at him. Obviously, he was better off shooting the lasers without a one-liner that just warned him that he had to move to dodge the lasers. Rick gets hit away with no impact shown, and the same goes for Jerry. The monster gets lasered by Summer, and Rick wonders why his personal force fields didn't kick in, so that it better be explained. I just have to assume that part of the monster's magical powers is making sure the force fields won't kick in. Rick explains that Jerry's acting pathetic because of Cthulhu magic. He calls Beth Honey and tells her to take a pail of monster dust home and spread it in a circle around their house, and then we see Rick and the kids on a hill overlooking a village. Morty naturally assumes they'll get the same fate as Jerry, but Rick assumes they'll be fine just because they grew up with the internet somehow. He says their next target is invisible, and makes a joke that Morty never has any girlfriends because he's stressed out, knowing that Morty used to have a girlfriend. Rick says they've gotta be able to see the monster first. Okay, so throw leaves on him, or liquid. He tells Summer to hit the button on top when he gives the signal and throw the bomb. Summer sucks up to him. Well, you'd expect her to be snarky with him because she's always snarky. It's good to have her written as a suck-up enabler because it makes her different from Morty, and her lack of morality justifies it. So Rick's advice is to send out a bunch of stuff, causing the monster to be visible. Rick complains that it didn't detonate, and I have to just assume it's because Rick made it drunk. They run from the monster for hours and have to hide up a tree while it sleeps. Rick steals dynamite from a demolition company with no attention given as to how, despite it being a vital part of the story. Maybe it was just really boring. So the monster gets blown up, and Rick can't use the portal gun because the Lovecraft dimension has a technology limit taking effect, making his equipment get glitchy. So hopefully that's supposed to explain why his bomb didn't go off. But why didn't the limit happen instantly? Rick refuses to go home out of arrogance, even though he can't do anything to Cthulhu without his technology. They're really better off temporarily leaving and then coming right back so that the technology limit will reset to 0 again. Nothing to be ashamed of there. Beth decides to give Jerry horse morphine when it doesn't make any sense that she'd give it to him if it's called horse morphine. And then out of nowhere, the Cthulhu magic turns out to be still in Jerry for some reason to threaten Beth with hallucinations. That seems unfair because it wasn't built up to at all. Meanwhile, Rick takes his family to a bar as there's suddenly an old clothing, and tells the bartender to tell him where to find the monster in exchange for a dime. It turns out the guy in the cloak is the son of Old Man Marsh, and conveniently knows Rick's name, because he's magical like that. Rick threatens him with a ray gun when he was just shown that his technology doesn't work, and the story ends with Rick supposedly being killed off. All because he was handed the idiot ball earlier, when it clearly doesn't count as retreating to just go away for 1 second. What is the IDW Shadow? Rick and Morty vs. Cthulhu, Issue 2. Morty goes into denial and eventually threatens the menacing monster with the ray gun that clearly didn't work before, and it fails because the monster with boring dialogue wants it to. Summer hits a bad guy over the head with a chair, and Morty hits him with the ray gun. I don't know why we don't get shown the impact with the bad guys, while we do get shown the impact against the good guys. Summer hits one of the aliens with a bottle, and the main monster insists that Dagon has power and knowledge beyond human comprehension. Summer naturally says that doesn't make sense. Why does she call the obvious alien a human in an attempt to accuse him of not knowing how great the power is? The boring alien says Father Dagon told him Rick would come here, and tells his grunt to put Summer in a cell with a homeless man who screams just to have fun, and then laughs. He says he doesn't look like a monster because he didn't take the oath of Dagon and stroke the Shoggoths. So Zadok tells Summer eventually that they can meditate to escape prison. It only worked because it's a magical other universe. I wonder why Morty and Summer were separated. Just from sadism? Morty finds out his cell is a girl, and is immediately happy to hold her hand. I wonder if she'll be a surprise villain when she doesn't seem like she would be. She seems too calm about her situation. Morty gets asked some questions by the guard, getting offended at being asked his ethnicity. He doesn't really know and gets insulted for being half Spanish. He's uncomfortable being asked if he's a virgin, and doesn't want to tell him that, even though I would have bragged about it right away if he wasn't anymore. So obviously he still is. And he doesn't get believed about Planetina. The girl says Dagon's order needs virgin souls for their ceremony because that's just one of the ingredients needed to make up the programming for its spell in this world. Arbitrarily. So of course she gets an idea to make sure they won't be useful for their dark ceremony. Summer's lucky she can meditate into the spirit world while hearing them. It's called the dreamlands though, where somehow everyone is the best version of themselves. So it doesn't make as much sense as the spirit world. Summer's told to look for something, and eventually ends up surrounded and killed by monsters she has to run away from. We see Morty tied up on a pirate ship. If this alien wanted Morty to keep being useful for his ceremony, why in the world did he put him in the same cell as a girl? How could anyone be that dumb? A flood happens. What saves Summer is that all of the moonbees get pounced by cats, but the art becomes too red for my liking. Summer calls a cat cute and pets him, and thanks to God with an unpronounceable name, who wants her to lead him to her brother. Of course, a giant summoned alien gets back at the idiot cult leader, who somehow didn't believe Morty about the fact that he isn't a worthy sacrifice anymore, and still tries to offer him up. Dagon grabs Morty to free him, and calls him his new favorite son with a sweet smile. Well, that was a heartwarming ending. Morty could have easily gone free because he'd get believed, but this is more creative. Rick and Morty vs. Cthulhu, Issue 3. Rick wakes up in an alien body, and finds out he was transferred to it as a reward for being a genius. Makes sense. But this is why I prefer sci-fi over fantasy, because this whole arc felt like conveniences and the magic rules coming out of nowhere. There's way too much boring, worthless dialogue. Eventually, Rick gets shown a huge library, and it's so him to not be impressed because it's not a computer. It's annoying that somehow the aliens here are such snobs that they don't need tasty food anymore, and they expect Rick to stay loyal after this. I guess they don't know him. Rick complains in his diary that they weren't impressed by his food fight and many escape attempts. So they put him in a cell, and Rick says it's bad to have narration cover up a montage to churn out exposition and raise stakes. It's surprisingly considerate of Rick to tell an alien not to talk to him because he'll be locked up for doing so. The alien says he always had a crush on him and just pretended to be crazy to avoid having to carry out menial tasks, but got inspired by Rick's rebelliousness. We don't see how he frees Rick, so I have to assume he pressed a button. Rick wants to go see the Forbidden Chamber supposedly sealed for his safety. Why is there a Forbidden Chamber in the same building as people forbidden from seeing it? Why doesn't someone take all the stuff in it somewhere else? The writer gets lazy and has the guards fall for the look over there trick. And then Rick kills them with a shock device. At least he was upset about it. Rick wants to use the Forbidden Chamber to go home, assuming there's a monster in here because it's a Lovecraft story. So he releases one, and Rick's narration bores me by insulting how Lovecraft's narration talks too much and cares more about architecture than action, degrading the story by doing the exact same flaw you're complaining about. The art isn't showing anything interesting. The monster rises up with Huey, and Rick cares enough to catch him. Anyways, he puts a helmet on his head and transfers his mind to the clone pod in his basement. Rick complains about the house looking different, and the story ends with Beth talking to him while possessed by Cthulhu, who wastes time threatening all of reality. If it was possible for him to get rid of it all, it'd have been done. So he's just delusional or bluffing. Rick and Morty vs. Cthulhu, Issue 4. There's incredibly boring pages, completely overloaded with boring narration we don't need by Morty, who wastes time writing a note to his parents about the situation, as if he could even get it to them. The pages do nothing but show us the obvious that Morty was swimming around in the water a lot and enjoying himself with Dagon. You'd think he'd say no to attacking a ship with him because he hates how evil Rick is. Dagon transformed him to make him better suited to aquatic life. It's nice to see him so happy with him, thinking that he's constantly given respect. He's just lucky Dagon felt like getting a son. He's told some confusing information that's supposed to be justified by the fact that Rick and Morty's arrival here messed with reality, but it's just stupid. It'd make more sense if Morty's new transformation just had him be capable of what Dagon said he is. Then Summers shows up in front of Nyarla, who calls Dagon out on constantly trying to take over his kingdoms. And somehow Nyarla knows why they could somehow never battle before. It's so ridiculous. You'd think if they were separated by other universes, he'd say that, not say narrative constraints or something. Morty refuses to let Summer hurt Dagon, with the scene being too melodramatic instead of them refusing to fight each other. Rick's lasers get blocked by a force field as he assumes Beth didn't ward the house. But she did. So if that was supposed to prevent her from getting possessed, there's no excuse for it happening. Rick's told this all started because he thought he was more powerful than the Elder Gods. An alien threatens him in his spaceship. I assume Jerry's got a Project Phoenix too because he's the main character. And Rick portals away and we see him sailing. The narration's extremely boring as panels are being wasted, and Rick calling it out doesn't justify that. Eventually Rick blasts some fire. Dagon says it was somehow a draw, and we see Rick say that he won, but he didn't, and Cthulhu wastes a whole bunch of time with boring, drivel dialogue where he eventually talks nihilistically and Rick agrees. Rick gets told that he doesn't really think nothing matters, because he cares about his family. He admits he's right and tells him to give his family back, and says he'll help him sell a crossover with him. Yeah, because supposedly Rick Sanchez lost in a fight with somebody, when it can close a portal on someone's head. Rick gets sent back to his garage, saves his family in the kitchen, and when his family doesn't know who Lovecraft is, with even Jerry not knowing, even though him reading a book of his started this whole arc, Rick doesn't tell him who Lovecraft is. Then Morty gets talked to by his girlfriend from the cell from behind a mirror because she's magical like that. So magical that she still knows him even though the reset button was pushed. She reveals she's the daughter of Cthulhu and says her father told her she had to do something so he could be brought back to bother Rick again. I hate that she says future crossover adventures. It's always annoying when the word crossover is mentioned, breaking the fourth wall. I only tolerated it from the series because I'm used to it and it's a comedy. And now she says this, when we're actually supposed to take things seriously. So Morty's body must have changed so that it could actually be capable of doing what she thinks he can do. The last page of the story references the first intro of the show, with a spaceship being chased by a flying Cthulhu, and we see inside it. So the last page in this whole arc was supposed to explain this. Except it kinda doesn't, because the story just cut ahead to this point. Why would what she did to Morty guarantee that Cthulhu would come back? If his egg actually would be Cthulhu, Rick would just instantly shoot it. So why would he even go here? It's obvious everyone would have rather seen this adventure. Instead, the story ends here. Everyone assumed the egg in that spaceship in the intro was stolen from the thing chasing them. Why would it chase them otherwise? If it was actually Morty's, and they were returning it, well, Rick would just portal the egg to here. This issue by Jim Zub is about Rick thinking his house got invented by Cthulhu. I just have to assume this only happened to him because Morty somehow gave aliens the wrong thing for him. Otherwise, Cthulhu would have no reason to start antagonizing Rick's family, making the whole arc stupid. It's not like every family goes through this when reading one of his books, so there's no excuse for this being the instigator of the plot. If it's not explained that the book is from another universe where it can be magical, I have to guess that the reason he knows which one of the infinite Cthulhus to go after is that he knows which dimension Jerry's book is from. It's cool that Rick deals with the various Lovecraft monsters effortlessly with his gadgets a different way every time. But I wish he actually explained that the reason he won't just open and close a portal over Cthulhu to kill him safely is that he wants a long drawn-out fight with him with no backup for him to get back at him. Eventually, Rick's technology becomes glitchy in the dimension, and I have to wonder why it took longer than a second for that to kick in. And somehow, Rick refuses to go home for just 1 second and come back to have his technology work again. So the idiot will force him to end up killed, but he comes back from being killed in the show because he's still connected to other Rick's Project Phoenixes, so whatever. If I had to pick a problem with the story other than its premise seeming forced, is that sometimes Rick had way too much boring dialogue, where he just kept rambling when I couldn't care less. I don't want to read him whining about how the writer of Cthulhu sucks and why, and want stuff to happen, but it could be worse. Ultimately, the story was kept from being bad by how awesome Rick was for most of it. This issue is about Summer and Morty ending up thrown in separate cells by alien cultists with no explanation. Summer meditates into the spirit's world because it's another universe with different rules, and ends up being saved by a god who wants her to repay him by leading him to Morty, who was somehow put in the same cell as a girl when he's wanted specifically because he might be a virgin. They should have known that'd go wrong. But good for Morty. It's also good for him that the monster ends up adopting him because conveniently he's perfectly fine with him not being a worthy sacrifice. But good luck happens in real life too, and he deserves it. This issue is about Rick being trapped in a boring place with bad food because the people there think they're so great they're above enjoying the taste of their own food. As in, they're idiots. He's here after being sent there because he's a genius, and eventually he gets freed by someone with a crush on him who ends up killed by the monster he frees for his trouble. It's convenient that the monster doesn't stop Rick from connecting himself to a machine to transfer him to the clone pod at home, which he conveniently wisened up enough to have, despite the fact that he acts Project Phoenix right after revealing it with the Tiny Rick episode. Why was there even a machine for Rick to come home anyways? If Cthulhu had it there so Rick could come home and be threatened by Beth, why didn't he just take Rick home right away? The story was just a whole bunch of boring dialogue with like nothing happening. So this issue ended in disaster for basically every character until Rick agrees to humor Cthulhu on the thing he has no reason to want to be humored on. I'm not buying that Rick couldn't defeat him, when he can just open and close a portal on anyone's head. Or if that's not enough because he came back after he should have beaten him, then he still could have sent him away. He could portal to another dimension in a certain death situation, like the lava volcano. But by that point he had to humor Cthulhu so he'd get his family back and hit the reset button. I just don't take this arc seriously. It never explains what happens. Jerry doesn't recognize the name of Lovecraft, even though him reading his book is somehow why the arc happened. And that happens before Morty met Kathy. And of course I hate the visuals anytime it tries to be gory or involve a bad-looking alien. Just from seeing the title of the arc alone, I was like, why are they having an arc like this anyways?